Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us. As people roll on, I'll do a brief introduction of the person that I'm so excited to talk to and excited for you to hear from. And that is Andrea Flores, who, like me, grew up on the border and like me grew up next to the largest binational community anywhere in the Western Hemisphere, if not the world. I'm here in El Paso, our sister city in New Mexico. Just right up the Rio Grande River is Las Cruces, New Mexico. And that's where Andrea is from originally. She's the Vice President of Immigration Policy and Campaigns at Forward.us. She previously worked in both the Obama and the Biden administrations. And in the Biden administration, I'm going to read this to make sure I get it right. She was the Director of Border Management on the National Security Council. And under the Obama administration, she was an immigration policy advisor. And she really caught my eye in a recent New York Times opinion piece that she wrote, helping the Biden administration and all of us who read it understand what's happening at the border and what the path forward might look like. In other words, the steps that the president can take to make this better. And so I've invited her to join us today and looking forward to what she has to say. And I'm going to do my best to include questions that you might have. I think there's a way that you can ask through one of the icons at the bottom. And I'll do my best to read your questions if we have time. Mind you, I can't really see the text so well. So this is going to be kind of a work in progress. So let me see if I can find Andrea. She's going to join us in just a second. Thank you all who are joining us. Good to see so many people on and some familiar names out there. Hello to Ireland. Hello to the people in Honduras. I see somebody there from Honduras. Thanks for the birthday wishes. Today I turned 51. So thank you all. Let me see if I can add Andrea again. Let's see, I accepted, and it's always a little bit of troubleshooting when we do an IG live. So bear with us. I see the RGV on. Good to see you all. San Antonio is in the house. Someone just says Texas. So to all the 254 counties, I say hello. And I'm going to check. Yeah, she's there. When I say accept, nothing happens. I see Austin in the house, Stafford, Texas. All right.
Hi there.
Made a connection.
Happy birthday. Thanks for having me on today.
Thank you so much. Thanks for joining. Tell us where you are right now.
Sure. I'm in Washington, D.C., in my office here at Forward.us, and really excited to talk to all of you today about the border. My heart is still in Las Cruces and with the border communities, so this is a really fun conversation.
Yeah, thanks for doing this. And I should have added when I was introducing you just now, you also just accepted an appointment at Harvard. You're going to be leading a seminar series there at their Institute of Politics. And I'm assuming it's going to be focused on issues like those that we're going to talk about today.
Yes, it's on the entire sort of state of immigration reform in the U.S. So for those of you in Cambridge at Harvard, I'll be doing a lot of speaking events there this semester.
Awesome. So let's dive right in. Will you tell us why we're seeing what we're seeing on the border? There was a dip in the number of people who were coming into the United States, who were attempting to cross, who were crossing in between ports of entry, and we've now seen those numbers rise. Why is this happening?
I think first, I want to start with the fact that we have a Venezuelan refugee crisis in our hemisphere. I think that for the first time in the last 3 years, we have had 7-point-something million Venezuelans leave their home in the last 3 to 5 years. That's a huge displacement crisis. And so what you're seeing at the border right now is the fact that many Venezuelans are leaving. Maybe they first went to Colombia, maybe they first went to Brazil, and they couldn't find work or housing. And so they're making their way up to the border and trying to access our asylum system or other protection. So there's a huge humanitarian crisis happening, which is why you're seeing this uptick in numbers, because since we'll call the end of Title 42 in May, we've had a lot of changing policies at the border. It's actually very hard to keep track of all of the different changes. And when you're a migrant, you're trying to make decisions based off of what you think might happen, when you reach the border, what a smuggler is telling you, what the internet says. So let's try and simplify it a little bit. The Biden admin has created some really fantastic legal options for Venezuelans, for some other nationalities, but they're new, they're limited, and they're just being tried out, right? And so these new legal pathways, we call them, really had an immediate effect after Title 42 lifted of lowering numbers at the border. But what we're seeing is people adjusting to how those work, and we're seeing them being tested in ways that can be improved. And so maybe we can talk a little bit about some adjustments the Biden administration could consider, because I don't think anyone wants people to have to take a dangerous journey to our border, use a smuggling network, carry their kids across the border. That isn't safe for anyone, especially when you have, barriers like barbed wire, other horrible sort of conditions that people are facing. That isn't the immigration system we want to be building. So people want better options.
From when I was a kid growing up here on the border in El Paso, and then much later when you were a kid growing up on the border in Las Cruces, New Mexico, I've seen border walls be constructed. I've seen the razor wire put in place. We now know about this floating buoy barrier, which Representative Joaquin Castro has called a drowning device, I think very accurately. We've seen a massive buildup in Border Patrol, a wholesale militarization of the border. Why doesn't that work? Whether you agree with those policies or not, why is deterrence not deterring people from making this 2,000-mile journey, from crossing with their 1 or 2-year-old child across a very dangerous river, knowing full well that many of the migrants don't make it, that we've had record levels of death and suffering. And it's not like it's easy street once you get here. There's a very real chance that you could be deported back to the very country from which you came. Or if you're able to stay here, you might not be able to work. You might not be able to connect with family. Why are people doing this? And why does deterrence not work?
Look, deterrence doesn't work because the reasons that people are fleeing far outweigh any penalty that the US can even conceive of or think of. Let's take for something like family separation. We had the US government decide to forcibly take children away from their parents, and you still saw people willing to take a risk because their lives depended on taking that risk. And they have no other options. They have no other options in the region. They have no other options in our neighboring countries. Their only option, they feel, in many cases for their very lives, is to come to the United States. And so that's one of the hardest things about setting border policy, is that we think that we can create a new punishment, ban asylum, create more detention centers, and that's going to influence the person who's forced to leave their home because they can't afford to live there anymore, because they're at risk of death, that their children may be killed if they stay there. Those decisions are unthinkable to many of us, but they are the conditions that are driving people to make the most unimaginably difficult choice. And so when we set border policy, we have to put ourselves in the shoes of the people who are impacted and actually using our immigration policies. And if you create a policy that people can't access, or if you create one that they can, let's take the ones that they have created, right? We said you can apply for parole if you have a sponsor in the United States. We've seen over 1 million Americans step up and say, I want to sponsor someone from the Western Hemisphere. And that's incredible, right? We're seeing Americans look towards the conditions that people are facing in this hemisphere and say, I want to help. But we need more of that. We need more policies that give people safer opportunities to come here, whether it's for temporary work, whether it's to reunite with their family, whether it's because they need to seek refuge. But right now, there's just the asylum system that everyone is trying to use. And asylum wasn't designed to be the one-size-fits-all relief valve for everyone in this hemisphere to use. And so that's what we're seeing. It's operationally not designed for what people are trying to get in their immigration process.
And I think it's also important to point out that we're not the only country and not the only part of the world that's experiencing this. So Colombia, which I'm just going to guess has something around 50 to 55 million people total, has accepted 2 million refugees from Venezuela. When we look at other parts of the world, other hemispheres, and we see refugees from Syria or Africa or South Asia, countries in the European Union are experiencing much of what we're experiencing here in the United States. And it seems to be provoking much of the same politics, right? There's kind of an authoritarian populist, call it a Trump way of responding, building walls and making immigrants the enemy and calling them rapists and a danger to our society. And then there are those in America, like the Democrats, who seem to be trying to find a better way. Although as a Democrat, as somebody who lives on the border, I've been so frustrated with my own party. I expect now from the Republicans the cruelty that we see from Greg Abbott on the border, or the greater cruelty that Donald Trump promises if he's elected. But we don't always get a clear signal from Democrats about what our party stands for and what our leaders are willing to do. While President Obama moved forward with deferred action on childhood arrivals, or DACA for Dreamers, which I think was a big positive step in the right direction, he was also called by many the deporter in chief. And I know from my time in Congress, visiting asylum seekers who were bussed up to Artesia, New Mexico, which is about a 3-hour drive from here, many of them chose to self-deport because of the horrible conditions in which they were kept, the limbo that they faced, it seemed like indefinitely. And we saw that president preside over more deportations than any president before him. With President Biden, I think he's made some positive steps in the right direction, especially recently, and I'm going to have you talk about that. But we've also seen him employ some of the Trump administration tactics, like a proposed asylum ban or keeping Title 42, which used the public health crisis of COVID to summarily return migrants and asylum seekers back across the border without ever attempting to process them, and really produced much of this crossing in between the ports of entry that we've seen. So even our own party has a challenge in letting go of a deterrence-only strategy. Tell us what you see that's working now within the Biden administration, and maybe we can get into some next steps that they can take.
Sure. So, I think deterrence has had a long run, right? For the last 9 years, since 2014, when we've really seen numbers be up at the border, we've been addressing it as a US government across administrations of deterrence first, deterrence, more detention, more bans, more deportations at the border. And we're still dealing with the same challenges. And so what is new and what is completely novel that the Biden administration did is they said, let's create an alternative to the asylum system for people who may not urgently need to flee to the border right now, and say, you can stay home, apply from your home countries, and use an option called parole. And they made that available to people from Cuba, Nicaragua, Haiti, and Venezuela. And what we saw is that people used those pathways. They didn't go then through the smuggling networks. They didn't choose the unauthorized crossings between ports. And that was a huge moment of, I think, success and something we can learn from. They also did something of trying to draw more people to come to a port of entry. I think anyone who grew up in the border knows that trying to cross between a port of entry is not just, it's dangerous and it's life-threatening and it's where people die. We don't want people to go between the ports because those are inhumane conditions. We want people at our ports of entry. So the Biden administration said, we want you to come and sign up for an appointment. And if you do that, then you can come into the US and you'll be able to work legally, right? You'll be able to apply for work authorization. So they're regularizing migration in a really smart way. But one of the reasons why we're seeing what we're seeing is what I just described is still limited, right? Only 1,400 people around there can sign up for a port of entry appointment every day. But we're seeing thousands of people coming in between the ports. So you're seeing an imbalance. And I think one of the first steps they can do right now is say, we want to expand appointments at the ports of entry. The next thing I think is the parole programs need to be expanded. They're in litigation, so it's tough. The Biden administration's hands are tied on letting in more people through parole. But I think immediately using CBP-1 as a way to direct people towards that safer option is a great thing to do. And then they should be doing things for people who have arrived here to make it easier for them to work legally. And they did that. They took a huge step with TPS for Venezuela. but tools like TPS don't necessarily change what we're seeing at the border. And that's okay, right? We need to use all the tools for people here, and we need to use all the tools to make migration safer in our region. So we need an all of the above strategy. Deterrence is just saying, let's try and shut the door. But what we know is that it doesn't work. And in fact, it enriches smugglers who make more money the harder it is to access our immigration system. Title 42 allowed smugglers to charge people 5 or 6 times. So we don't want to make smugglers rich. We want to make migration much safer. And I think American voters, that's what they want too. They just want Democrats to propose solutions. And that is, I think the Biden administration has made some good progress, but we needed to be doing more, just clearly based on what we're seeing right now.
If you could harden your heart to the suffering of those who are trying to come to this country and build a wall that was high enough and effective enough to deter immigration, that would be one thing. If that were an option, I could understand how reasonable people could get behind it. They could say, you know what, we are just not responsible for the well-being of the rest of the world. Though we're a country of immigrants, we're no longer going to be that way. We built this wall and it's going to keep people out and it's going to keep order at the line where we meet the rest of the world. If that were a solution, I could understand, though I wouldn't agree with it, how people could get behind it. But I think one of the things you're clarifying is that no matter what we have done, no matter how cruel, how militarized, how much death and suffering it causes and costs, people are still going to come. So if we can just stop that in terms of the decision tree, like you just can't find enough deterrence to get to the solution that some want, which is to stop all immigration and all people crossing in between ports of entry with the current status quo. What I think you're beginning to describe is if we all agree that what we have right now is not orderly, it's not legal, what many people are doing, and it's not safe, certainly, given the number of people who are dying. We want to find those things in policy going forward. And so if it is ensuring that legally people who are already here can work, and you mentioned TPS, and I think that means temporary protected status, and it is applied to people who come from a given country by a certain time and who cannot go back to that country because it's really messed up. And that's probably the term of art to describe Venezuela right now. You cannot send somebody back there. We have no diplomatic relations with them. They wouldn't accept somebody if we sent them in the first place. And so President Biden recently gave temporary protected status to almost 500,000 Venezuelans who are already here, who got here by a certain date. And what he said, and we need him to clearly articulate this and communicate this out to Venezuelans who are thinking about coming, that TPS only applies to those who are already here and who got here by a certain date. Because I think there's a legitimate concern that a TPS designation could send a signal to every Venezuelan who might want to come to the United States that they will qualify. And I just want to make that point clear for those who are wondering about that. If President Biden not only wanted to do the right thing by making sure that we help those who have literally nowhere else to go, and if they come here and qualify for asylum, we know that not only are they going to lead better lives, but they're going to contribute far more than they could ever take to the success of the United States. I mean, that's something we know in our hearts, but it's also been proven by the data and the people who've looked at the numbers. If he wanted to follow up on these steps that he's taken, like issuing TPS for these 470,000 Venezuelans, what would that look like? We can argue that Congress should do their job, and certainly they should. No one should hold their breath hoping that a divided Congress with the House run by Kevin McCarthy and effectively run by the right wing of his party is going to move forward on immigration. So it's all on President Biden right now, at least until we get a new Congress. Andrea, what are you looking for him to do that provides that orderly, safe, legal path for people to come to this country?
That's right. I like to be honest. There's no hope of immigration reform in Congress right now, which means that President Biden has to use the tools that Congress already gave him. So let's talk first about the long time undocumented in the United States. There are not as many tools as I'd like there to be. You know, it's very difficult to replicate something like DACA with deferred action. It's difficult to use parole. But it's actually why it was so exciting to me that he used TPS for Venezuelans who are already here, Venezuelans who entered before August 31st. And here's why: because TPS was a tool created by Congress that said if we can't return people safely to the countries that they came from, we can give them this temporary protection. And there are actually a number of countries and a number of people who have been here, in some cases for decades, who also would benefit from TPS. I'm thinking of other Central American countries, of Guatemala. There could be expansions for Nicaragua. Um, and also from African countries where we actually can't be sending people back to places like Mauritania. So first, when we talk about the long time undocumented, the currently undocumented can't work, stuck in the immigration court system, have no options, he can regularize more people quickly with TPS, and it's fully in his authority to do so.
Let me
And what,
stop you
yeah.
there, because one of the questions we have from, it's Mrs. Louise. She says, what about all of the people who are already here undocumented and who've been waiting a long time? Because one of the things we hear about is, why is the president taking care of those who've just recently arrived when there are millions who've been here for a while, trying to, through legal channels, fix their status, be able to work, raise their families? What happens to them? And I think what I hear you saying is that the president has power to address those who've been here for much longer and want to do this the right way. What does that number look like, Andrea? If the president just gave work authorization, essentially, so that these 470,000 Venezuelans are no longer dependent on public handouts and public housing and can work and earn a paycheck and pay into the system, how many more people could he help and thereby help the country by regularizing their status?
So the estimate of people who are from countries that meet the law's definition of who could get TPS is about between 2 and 3 million more people. And so that's astounding, right? You know, we do have a broken immigration system. We have over 11 million undocumented immigrants in the US, but that is some relief that he can provide right now and give people security and also, you know, take care of both populations. It's not just the people coming tomorrow at the border, it's also the people who have been here in our communities for decades. And so that's why we're going to continue to be pushing TPS. And actually, studies have found it is not, in fact, a pull factor. And here's why. TPS, when people are legally working, when they're integrated here, they're able to actually send money back to their home countries. And we've seen the impact of what we call remittances help people stay at home, help their families stabilize back at home. It's like a regional stabilization tool as well, because all of the questions are also about foreign policy. And so TPS is a both and. And it's why I hope the Biden administration follows their Venezuela announcement with some other country announcements, and why we shouldn't connect what we're seeing at the border simply with that TPS or Venezuela announcement, because people who are coming are not going to be able to qualify. Like I said, August 31st was the cutoff date. But I know we want to talk about also beyond the undocumented, but I'm happy you highlighted that.
So if I could advise the administration, or if I had a wish list that I would want them to look at, I would love for them to make the Americas a greater foreign policy priority. I mean, you know, what's happening in Ukraine is heartbreaking. I'm so grateful for what the president has done in his leadership of the Western democracies to make sure that Ukraine has the resources to fight off this invasion from Russia. So much of the rest of the world is so complicated, so tough, and his team is doing a wonderful job. But this is the part of the world that we're literally connected to by land, by family, by culture, and increasingly by language. And I would love for the president to use his singular, extraordinary convening power to bring the leaders of all these countries, from Canada down to Argentina, together wherever, and say, hey, let's make sure that first and foremost, we're all doing our part and shouldering our share of the burden to make sure that no one country, including the United States, is doing more than it should. But more importantly, and over the long term, let's make sure that we're addressing the root causes of this outmigration so that we don't try to handle this at the US-Mexico border, and we don't handle it in crisis mode reactively, but we're taking a long-term, proactive, development approach to make sure that people can stay in their home countries. I love the United States. I never want to leave here. I would only leave if I had no other choice. And that's exactly what these people are doing right now. How do we make sure that they have a choice to stay? So that would be at the top of my wish list. What would be, in addition to what you said, what would you like the administration to do? What could they do at the border in terms of processing? What would you like to see with Border Patrol, Customs and Border Protection? What are some other steps they could take to relieve the burden on border communities to make sure there's more order and safety in the path that people take here, in addition to TPS and the work permits that you just described?
So there needs to be, and there really has never been before, an effort by the Biden administration, by the federal government, to actually coordinate on a daily basis with cities who are receiving new arrivals. And so border communities have been, making this ask for really decades now, where border communities are just incredible heroes in my mind, because every day, and we're seeing it right now, they are intaking, it could be upwards of 100 people who are released on the street with nowhere to go. And we're seeing NGOs, organizations, religious organizations step up and say, we're going to welcome you, we're going to help you get to your end destination, we'll make sure you have everything you need to start your journey in the United States. But in many other countries, that service is actually a government service. And so when people come in through the borders, they're met by a whole host of services. Actually, the Biden administration has done this once before. In the Afghan evacuation, they set up an incredible processing center that brought together lawyers, all the relevant government agencies. It brought together healthcare providers, and it says, we're going to welcome Afghans who just got here. We're going to help them get set up. We'll give them temporary housing, and we'll have a plan for how they start their lives in the United States. And we quite frankly need that in border communities. So that way we don't have people being placed on buses to cities where they have no connections. You talk to migrants at the border right now, and when I was there last in May, I asked people, why are you going to New York? And they said, I don't know. They sent me there. And I think the Biden administration has an opportunity to bring some order to that, and to also make sure that they're giving cities like Chicago, like Boston, like Philadelphia, a heads up. American voters want to know, who are these people coming into my community? What is their story? What is their path here? I think those are reasonable questions. And I think when we talk about getting Americans more excited about immigration, or understanding why it's always been a part of our story, and what it's a part of our future, just because migration levels are high for every major democracy right now. So what that means is we have to explain this process to Americans, help them understand what happens when someone gets to New York, what happens when someone leaves El Paso and ends up in Denver. These are all things that the Department of Homeland Security, Health and Human Services can start doing. We just need to encourage them to start doing that, because we can really be a market leader around the world, showing what it means to welcome asylum seekers, give them a fair process, adjudicate their claims much faster than 4 to 6 years. Imagine living not knowing your future for 4 to 6 years and not being able to work for part of that. What kind of system is that? That doesn't make any sense. So the Biden administration actually said, we're going to speed up those adjudications and get people their resolution of their cases faster. Those types of fixes are fantastic, and what we need to see in our the future. So I get really excited when you ask about what we should be doing at the border, but I'll turn it back to you.
There's just so many opportunities for the president and the administration to make this better. And I know President Biden is a good man. And I think that's what drew so many of us to him in the 2020 election. I hope it continues to draw people to him in 2024. But I also think this is an extraordinary opportunity for him to demonstrate that, not just as a candidate and not through his rhetoric, which was so powerful in 2020, and I think was what helped him get elected, but through his actions now as president. And again, I want to underscore some of what you said. He's taken some really important positive steps in the right direction. He's also done some things that other administrations before him have done that tend to focus on deterrence, that does not work, and frankly just creates more chaos, pushes more people to cross in between ports of entry, for example, than at the port of entry, which is what all of us want, including migrants and asylum seekers. They would do it that way if they could. They just feel that they can't. I know you're not a politician, but I know you have worked around politicians, and I bet you care about the outcome of the 2024 presidential election. So I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. If I were to assume what the likely Republican nominee Donald Trump's message on the border is, it is finish the wall. It is send them all back. And then it's probably going to be some more provocative cruelty, either how he describes those asylum seekers and refugees who come to this country, which he did as president as an invasion, described them as animals, tried to scare us about what they were going to do to us. And I would argue inspired the shooter who came to El Paso and murdered 23 people in this community. This guy who echoed a lot of what Trump had said he was coming here to repel the invasion of Hispanics who were going to take over the state and take over this country. Very clear where Trump's coming from, where he wants to take us, and there's nothing ambiguous about it. And there are many people who are excited by that message. And I would say, in trying to be honest about this, for some, it's exciting because at least this guy has a plan. We've been talking about the border and immigration for my entire life. We never seem to get it fixed. It always seems to get worse. This guy is going to fix it. It may be cruel. I may not like every aspect of it, but he's going to get it done. To be clear, none of what I just described will get it done or will work or will do anything but make it worse and create more chaos, more suffering, more harm, and fewer legal pathways, which means more people potentially breaking the law. So if that's what Trump is saying, what could President Biden say in the heat of his reelection campaign? He's on a debate stage. They've just asked President Trump to describe what he's going to do if he's given a second term. What could President Biden say about what his second term would look like?
I think it would look like rebuilding the immigration system that America actually needs. One where we have a functioning set of legal pathways that help someone seeking protection for their lives, someone who simply wants to reunite with family, someone who wants to work in the US. I think he would say that he used every legal tool that he had by the end of his first term, and he needs more. I think he would use his bipartisan record of getting huge things done. He got a climate bill done. He got an infrastructure bill done. I really think he has the ability to bring both parties together here and say, we can be reasonable and come to a good compromise on an immigration system that actually works for our states, our communities, and for immigrants themselves. It's embarrassing right now that the United States hasn't been able to solve this problem, but I don't think it's been a big enough political priority. And I understand why. It's for all the reasons you said. It feels like, well, if we just use the intimidating tools and we deter people and there's nothing we can really do other than put more people in detention, that we've been trying that. We've been trying that for my entire career. It isn't working. And so I think President Biden is creating some exciting new, I like to call them proofs of concept, of showing that people want to go and immigrate to the US in the right way, in the legal way, in the safe way. And so I think he could really lead in that moment, but he has to keep contrasting the cruelty. He's not a leader of a party who is okay with small children getting caught in barbed wire in a river. Like, that is the contrast. That's the alternative. He's against the taking children out of the arms of their parents. And that is really what we're talking about, the humanity here. I mean, we're the party for human rights, and he's a president who can really lead and be that market leader in showing how you treat immigrants humanely from the second they step foot on US soil to if they need to be returned home even. We don't even talk about, there's ways that you can remove people in a safe, humane, and fair way. But right now, no part of our process really works that way. So I think there's a lot of hope for a second term, as long as we all and anyone listening here today gets involved and tells their Democratic leaders, I care about this issue. I think we can do it in a way that aligns with our human rights and our values. And I think solutions are possible, but we have to build support and let the president know that we support him when he does something bold, like give TPS for Venezuelans. For 400,000 people's lives were changed last week. So we need to have his back. And then we also need to support him when, we look at the border and say, we do have a challenge there. I don't think it helps to pretend that what's happening at the border is not a crisis or not concerning. It is concerning because human beings are being let out on the streets and nobody wants that. So I think continuing to push him while we can, and that's how I'll be spending my time for the rest of this year and next.
I love it. And I got to tell you, it seems from the outside, and you've been in the inside, but it seems from the outside that these people that I really admire, whose values I think I share, and most of us I think share, and I'm talking about President Obama and President Biden now. My guess, and I've never been in the room, but my guess is in the room, they want to do the right thing. And there are those advocates who are saying, hey, we should do everything that Andrea just said, right? Because it's the right thing to do. And it's going to provide the order that so many of us crave, right? None of us like what's happening right now. Nobody, Democrat, Republican, or otherwise, everyone can agree that this is not working and this is not how it should be. And so there will be that person like you who will say, look, we can do these steps 1 through 5, and it's going to produce these outcomes. And I'm going to guess there are other people in the room, and I don't think it is done with malice. I think it may be done from a place of ignorance, who say, yes, but then we also have to show that we're tough. So let's build a little bit more wall. Let's deport a few more people. Let's really show people that we can be hard and tough on these immigrants coming over. I think about President Obama building more of the wall here in El Paso, in my community, despite our objections and our protests. I think about the transit ban proposed by President Biden. Do either of them really believe in that and want to do that? Do they get talked into it because they think that is the politically winning ploy? My guess is that you cannot out-Trump Trump. And if somebody wants to see someone be mean and cruel to immigrants, they're going to go for the real thing every time. Trump wins that one 10 out of 10 times. If the president, to your point, is willing to do something bold that's really going to help people, that's going to help our border communities, it's going to help America, that's going to provide this orderly path that we're missing right now. And yes, they're going to get banged up by Fox News for quote unquote opening the border, though no one is for that, and no one, especially President Biden, would ever do that. But Fox News was never with you. You were never going to get them. Just draw them out of your calculations completely. What you will do, if you do what you just described, Andrea, is you will excite me and Democrats and people for whom immigration is an important issue. You'll bring back these border communities that, frankly, you're losing right now. And not because they don't like Democrats or don't like President Biden. They feel like they're left to their own devices very often. And they're not getting the help. I saw a comment from our friend Stephanie, who said, there needs to be better coordination between border communities and interior cities. And you mentioned what we've done for Ukrainian refugees and Afghan refugees. If the president did that, man, I'm already fired up for his reelection. I'm already going to do everything I can to help him win, especially given the alternative being Donald Trump. But I'll tell you, there'd be so many more people. And all these questions about, is he too old to run? Is he exciting to Democrats? Do they want someone else? Right now, show us this kind of bold leadership. And I think not only do you do the right thing, not only do you get these great outcomes that you described, I think it makes it much easier for the president to win re-election and then execute that program that you just described that could define his second term. I mean, imagine a president using all their political capital to move forward on rewriting our immigration laws. It really hasn't happened, at least successfully, since Ronald Reagan was president. And Joe Biden, that could be the defining act of his career and his administration. It would do a world of good for this country. All right, I've kept you on a little bit longer than I told you I would, but it's been such a great conversation, and I can see from the comments and from some of the questions you've answered from those who are viewing how engaged everyone is. So at some point down the road, we need to do this again. But before we go, leave us with some closing thoughts. Some of the questions that came in are from people who ask, what can I do? How do I get involved? Andrea, how do I support the work that you're doing right now and get us to this vision that you've described?
Sure. So the first thing I would do is many Democrats, including ones I've worked for, think that voters don't care about this issue, that they're not moved by this issue, that they don't want them to introduce a bill or put forward solutions. So they need to know that you care and are engaged. So whether that's your local House member, your senator, also President Biden himself, thank him for being bold on something like TPS for Venezuela. And like I said, have his back and say, we encourage you to use all the tools in your toolbox right now to bring as much relief to the undocumented and to bring as much like order and safety to the border as you possibly can. I think they need to hear that and be given some confidence, because you mentioned people who argue against the ideas I talked about. And I think in many good faith, people want to believe that the wall and a detention center is going to change the minds of someone who is deciding to leave their home. But what we know after interview with people who migrate is that those factors here in the US, they don't change their decision, because so often they're traveling, they're trying to save their child's life, they're trying to keep living. So we have to design our policy around the people who are actually using it. And so I think for all of you, also working with your local immigrants' rights organizations, there's so many organizations. If you're in, like I said, at the border or in New York, Philadelphia, all of these new cities who are for the first time welcoming a larger number of immigrants, go volunteer. Go talk to them, learn their stories, and you too can inform better policy that's informed by people who are actually using our immigration system, versus many people in Washington, myself included, is sometimes you're trying to guess, but we really have to go to the ground and understand what people are facing. So that's my call to action, and thank you all for staying on for this conversation. And Beto, I hope this was a great way to spend your birthday talking about immigration policy, but I've had a great time.
Absolutely. Thank you for doing it. And thanks to everyone who joined us, the great comments, the great questions. And, you know, as Andrea said, I think there are many people who may disagree in good faith. I hope that we can actually have that conversation and that debate and get to something better, because I think everyone agrees that what we have right now is not what we should have for this country, and certainly for those who are making this journey to our country. So thank you for what you're doing. And folks, follow Andrea here on Instagram or on Twitter. As I mentioned earlier, she wrote an outstanding piece in the New York Times that lays much of this out. She's someone to watch and to listen to going forward. You can also check out forward.us. And if you're in the border area or you want to support those in the El Paso region who are working on this issue, look at Annunciation House, look at Las Americas. There's a number of amazing organizations right here who are trying to help this country do it the right way. So Andrea, thank you.
Thank
We'll
you.
see you at the next conversation, and best of luck on everything you're doing.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks again.